Hello, I hope everyone is doing all right. We just passed the midterms of our term, and I know that can be really stressful as we kind of get over that hump, and now we are in the stretch of the second half of the term. So in our class, Ethics of Communication, with focus on interpersonal communication. And we're just grabbing all these tools about philosophy, ethical philosophies, so that you can start building your idea of who you want to be in the world and how you want your relationships and your interpersonal encounters and those conversations to be functional. Some of you have mentioned things about wanting to explore difficult conversations or conflict situations, which I teach a class just on that. So you should definitely look for that. But we do kind of start to dive into that a little bit in this lecture, mostly because we are really looking at tension, and it could be an internal tension or an external tension that we have between the needs we have for ourselves as an individual, autonomy and agency, and the responsibility we have towards others, and social contracts and social responsibilities. So that means that's a lot of stuff. Today, we are going to talk about John Rawls and social contracts. We're going to throw just a sprinkle of John Locke and natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and how that turns to life, liberty, and happiness. And then this idea of happiness and really talking about symbolic interactionism and social responsibility. And that's another sociology kind of theory that we're throwing in the mix. So we have this week is layered, and I'm not going to. I think there's some complicated elements to it, but I've been watching your work, and the book reports just came in, and you are blowing my mind. So even though I know you're kind of sludging through some of this philosophical uh, pieces that I've been giving you, you are starting to really get momentum, and I want you to stick with it. I am really looking for how we are going to pull it all together as we come through the second half of the term. So on that note, we're talking about, as I said, autonomy and connection, meaning that there is a tension between us as an individual and our need to be an individual, and a tension of needing connection and belonging, and this that we are, the nature of being human is a social element. We are social creatures, despite all these digital things and these houses and little, like we're in all these little boxes and we're all kind of sprinkled around. And even me, I'm showing up for you in this little box. In the end, it is really what drives us is our social connection. And there is uh, evidential backed neuroscience that when we live in places of connection, of purpose, of gratitude, we actually create neural pathways that activate more oxytocin, which is different than dopamine, by the way, and oxytocin, which brings in that feeling of happiness and calmness and a feeling of compassion and empathy. And we can have a lot more focus when we're in this state, in this parasympathetic state. And so that means that even though we have this pull towards our individual needs, we have to think of how that's balancing with this other tension of our very human need to belong. As Maslow says, it's in the third tier of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we do need that need to belong. And then if we were to continue with Maslow's, all the way to top would be self-actualization, which we can, and self-esteem needs as we move up. So we need it all. All right, so symbolic interactionism is this idea that we are communicating through symbols. That means that language is a series of symbols. We have visual symbols, even gestures can act as symbols, and different nonverbals, definitely images and the way we dress and the way we present ourselves, that has types of things. Sometimes we actually have actual things like brandings, logos, or even something like a ring is a type of symbol. So we are constantly gauging and interacting with each other. And we have all this messaging coming at us, and we think about symbols as a way to attach meaning to all that messaging that's coming in. Language is a type of symbols. Language is made up of symbols, and those symbols and all symbols, inherently, everything has no meaning in itself. This a ring on my finger has no meaning. It is because of my society and what it means to have a ring on your ring finger, on your left hand, that you have attached meaning, and I attach meaning to that to mean I'm married. But it's through the interaction with that symbol and the way we attach meaning to symbols that we get meaning. Same with language. If I was speaking in a language you didn't understand, it would have no meaning. You are bringing the meaning. And if we are culturally lined up, or if we are uh, part of a similar tribe or region or family, or as a couple, we're always trying to line up how we're interacting with language and all of these symbols for the same interpretation. And sometimes a lot of conflict is because someone else has a different interpretation of a symbol than you. And then we begin in the difficult conversation of negotiating meaning. What does that mean? Some people are coming at it with a fixed mindset that kind of makes it difficult to actually dialogue about meaning about something. And a fixed mindset will do, or I don't want to say, will often create defensive mechanisms when they are up against information that contradicts the way they've interpreted the message. And if you're saying, no, that's not what it means this, then you either enter into a negotiation to find common ground, to make an agreement, to manage the difference in the way we're doing it, and that can happen with an open mindset. But if we have a fixed mindset, or we're trying to talk to someone, you know that feeling, it's like you're getting up against a wall. It doesn't matter what you say. They say, nope, 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 nope. This is what it means. This is what it means. And they're not willing to open it up to perception checking and um and collaborative dialogue and an interaction to negotiate the meaning. And but when, but if we have the opportunity to be in a dialogue with someone who actually wants to dialogue and is open and mindful, now all of a sudden, even if we disagree, there's an element of curiosity. We're bringing our listening skills to that conversation. We are curious about another perspective. And when we're curious about another perspective, say, hey, when got this message, or when I saw this, I thought it meant that. Is that how you intended it? Right? You're going to throw the microphone back into the other person's hand, and then they are going to dialogue about how, oh, I can't believe you thought I meant that. I really meant this. And depending on what that is, if talking to someone who is engaged in creating a symbolic interaction conversation, what you're going to get is someone who is, even if they disagree, is going to find ways to be curious about how to craft their message in a better way. This light is blinking over here. Right. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, that someone who has more open mindset, even if it is a belief structure, and you are asking them to twist the way they look at something, to look at it in a different way and do perspective checking. An empathetic response has an element of curiosity and wants to know your point of view. And they're not going to be dismissive of it. They're not going to attack it or attack you. Like often someone who's has a really deep resistance to dialogue about interpretive meaning is going to start to make the attack against the person themselves instead of the concept that we are dealing with, right? Like, oh, you always do this, or I knew you wouldn't listen to, blah, blah, blah. And that attack turns the other person into a place of defensiveness. And once someone's in an attack defense loop, we can get super flooded and our circuits go from a logical reasoning place to a place that can often be of aggression. And that aggression, even if we are just going to smile and pretend, does leak out and the consequences are there. So that's what we want to think about with this idea of symbolic interactions and how we are creating how are we creating spaces for dialogue about creating shared meaning around language, symbols, and we negotiate. And when we negotiate, remember when we had our two onions with social penetration theory, that when we start sharing and we can start lining up, and we might actually get to a place where we can co-create meaning with another person. Of course, the more controversial the topic, the more the debate is over defining one word. An important thing to distinguish with that. Okay. So that being said, the other kind of philosophical things that we're coming out with, symbolic interaction theory is a sociology communication theory we use to really look at dialogue. However, when we move into John Rawls and social contracts, or even maybe I should start with John Locke since maybe I'll go in. John Locke did come before John Rawls. That with John, both of these theories, I'm using them this week to talk about this idea of social responsibility. And we built with the idea of social interactionism first, and then we want to look at how that connects to our responsibility to others. John Rawls talks about having a social contract. Once you are part of a group, once you take on an identity within that tribe, however you define that tribe, family, city, religious group, your nationality, whatever that is, that once you take on that identity, John Rawls says you come with a social contract. And we'll get into that. John Locke is interested in this idea of natural rights. And the social contract from natural rights is the essential needs or obligations we have to one another in a society. So this is a complex ethical issue because do I have, and should I be loyal to A or loyal to B? So if I'm loyal to my family and I have a social contract with my family, but I'm also loyal to my country and I have a social contract with my country, we could have a tension between those two. What if my country needs me to go and enlist and defend our border, but my social contract with my family is to take care of an aging elder or a parent, and if I leave, they will have no one to take care of them. So like we have this tension of social contracts and which is which, what should I be doing, and where does responsibility lies. And a lot of John Locke and John Rawls kind of use these as our trolley problem. This is a kind of a trolley problem to think about. Where is loyalty? Is the loyalty to the greater, um, I, um, bigger social contract identity, or are we in subcategories and that's where our loyalty starts and ends? Trolley problem. I don't know. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think that these are things that when we talk about ethics and how they show up as in our communication, in our interpersonal encounters, that we have to understand that there is room for dialogue. That's what ethics will say. There is room for dialogue. Okay, which is why we are dialoguing about this. Okay. Uh, the other thing about John Locke that is really important, when he did his work, this is pre-American United States Revolution, American Revolution. He comes out of really a society religion, where religion, if you didn't agree with the religion of the group, that was really where your purpose lies, and what was right and wrong was defined through the main religion of your country. And he's really coming in at it and saying that there are other rights beyond whether you are this religion or that religion. And Kant's categorical imperative is also kind of coming at it that way too. And he writes life, liberty, and property, meaning that every individual has natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and they are responsible. Everyone is responsible for respecting these rights for everybody else. And no one has a right to harm another person. No one has the right to take uh, possessions or actions against another person that would take away these basic rights. And so when the Constitution of the United States is being written and it gets changed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, once we get to the pursuit of happiness, we are locking into this idea of social contract, that happiness is derived not by external tangible items, but the pursuit of happiness is this idea of self-actualization, that we are moving towards. How do we live in a purposeful way to take care of others? How does our purpose is in service to others? And this is very different than utilitarianism. Uh, and we'll get there. I want to make sure I talk about that, but it's very different than utilitarianism. So when Locke writes this, and then it gets translated into I really just put this in because this is the first time we're talking about the responsibility of the governed and the government. And again, these are very big meta rules, and I'm talking about an interpersonal communication class. So when you take these ideas, I want to hear, how does it show up in the daily conversation between your roommates, between colleagues at work, family, romantic relationships, friends, or in other ways. This week will really launch us into next week when we get into environmental responsibility and our responsibility beyond person to person. So from John Locke, we build into John Rawls. And John Rawls is a philosopher that was really grappling with this tension of a social contract, and that social contract, you have the responsibility to fulfill a social contract, which means you need to find the purpose in your daily lives that means that you're in service to others. That's what John Rawls is saying. Okay. Now, that being said, and you can see I put the dates for John Rawls because it's no accident that he is he's growing up during the Great Depression in the United States, which is really impacting how he is perceiving the world. When he saw parts of the society crumbling and there were people who were not being taken care of through intense poverty and inability to work. And so as he's developing this, you can see the currents of that in his writings. But, okay, so this is where we need to start talking about why this is not utilitarianism. Because we just came out of the week where we talked about utilitarianism, which is a type of consequential philosophy. And this is that utilitarian at its core is maximizing happiness and well-being for as many as possible. That what is the most benefit for the least harm. And utilitarianism is always trying to weigh that, okay, we will have to make a sacrifice at some point, and it is usually the group, the smallest group possible will be impacted so there we can take care of the greatest number of people. And unfortunately, the smallest group is not usually the richest people or the people with the most outlier privilege, even though that is notoriously the smallest group. The group that becomes the group to sacrifice is usually the minority group. And the minority group is the group traditionally that is one that doesn't feel like it has a voice or doesn't have a voice, doesn't have equal representation, and their perspective is not being included, yet there is decisions making that the burden of sacrifice will be on that community. Uh, and the reasoning behind that is for the benefit uh, for the most, the most benefit for the least harm, right? And a lot of the stories that you watch are really playing around with like an individual who has to make a sacrifice to save the day. And when we see, my favorite one, of course, is Guardians of the Galaxy. In the very first movie, when Groot um, starts growing around the Guardians and building branches and layers of himself. And his little buddy is like, "You're good. If you do this, you will die." Um, but he does it to save the group. And by saving the group can fulfill the social contract to save everybody. So, in this very tragic and emotional moment in that movie, we're getting that utilitarian ethic that the sacrifice, uh, there's a great sacrifice for the greater good. And that is a note we hear over and over again. That is not what John Rawls is saying. John Rawls' social contract is about justice as fairness. So when we, even though fair is a very abstract term, uh, the the John Rawls says the social contract is that we have to make rules and laws and policy that will maximize the greatest amount, the greatest benefit for as many, and it should lean towards the least privileged or disadvantaged groups of our society or whatever the group is, however you define the group, the ones that are at the least disadvantage, the sacrifice should be made for them. And instead of the other way around where it's the minority. No, in this one, justice as fairness as that rules, policy, and laws should be built for that group. And then when it's built for that group, the ripple effect will be that it'll be the greatest good for all. And that's how you create fairness, by finding how we can move towards the balance of those with the least privilege or the greatest obstacles, whatever that is. So you can think about in your workplaces or when you feel like, God, this job and it's so not fair, and that I wonder what John Rawls would say about how to approach those situations in order to maximize the happiness. So that means that this approach that John Rawls is talking about, he's really asking us that we need to respect the rights of everyone. Now, sometimes, how do you do that? This is where the ethics and the philosophy get tangled up, right? Because uh, um, we are trying to maximize this idea of the pursuit of happiness. And to do that becomes really difficult because a lot of people with the best intentions have decided what that is without really going through that symbolic interaction process and perception checking and understanding the generalized other of the collective. So John Rawls says that in order to really understand what is justice as fairness, you must understand that every individual has a veil of ignorance. Every single one of us is coming from a veil of ignorance. And that means that we have biases, and our past and background and the way that we interact with symbols, we have constructed, like building blocks, a story, a narrative about ourselves and a narrative about everything we see that is like a brick wall. He calls it a veil, but I don't want you to think of it like a wedding veil that's all light and flowy. Maybe we can get there if we do some mindfulness and keep that open mindset, a growth mindset. But the truth is that the veil is more, for most people, a brick wall. And it depends, of course, on context or the relationship dimension, the context dimension and the relationship dimension. But a lot of us have some brick walls, and you can't see through a brick wall. You can't talk through a brick wall. It's hard to climb over a brick wall. And so that veil of ignorance is really an opportunity to have a thought experiment and to decide, how can I make a choice? How can I make a rule or a policy that creates a fair and equitable outcome? How can I do that if I'm enclosed in brick? And that means that it's not enough to just say, you are something. I am for whatever it is, social change or access to education. It's not enough to say that. You have to say, okay, that belief structure is behind this brick wall. And if I'm going to say that that's true, then I need to participate in dialogues. I have to engage in perception checking. I have to negotiate meaning and roles with those who have different perspectives than my own. And when you jump into those dialogues and you're jumping in with this idea of curiosity and that your veil of ignorance is something that a bias that you want to understand, but you know it's not the only way to look at something, you start moving towards empathy. And when I like you hear a lot, and you have to be empathetic. Empathy is a communication competency skill. Empathy, empathy, empathy. But I'm really trying to walk you through what that looks like and why sometimes it's really difficult to get to that point. So we understand that utilitarianism is about a sacrifice that we make for the greater good, where John Rawls is interested in how do we make sure there no one's being sacrificed by leaning towards the disadvantage and and those who lack certain privileges towards whatever it is we're moving towards, and to include them so that we can fulfill our social contract that justice is being fair, or justice as fairness. So utilitarian asks, what will produce the most good? What would be fair for everyone if I didn't, where, okay, the produce the most good, sorry. And John Rawls is asking, what would be fair for everyone if I didn't know my own position? So he's asking you to put your position aside. Boy, how do you do that? Sometimes we're clinging to our positions like a life raft, like a door in the Atlantic Ocean. There's only room for one of us up here, right? We're clinging to that life raft. And most of us cling to that. And that's where that fixed mindset comes in. So if I'm going to say, okay, you want to get past this veil of ignorance, or I want to get past this veil of ignorance, how do you have to know your position so you cannot know your position. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that there's different exercises for doing this, from journaling to video blogging to therapy. There's different ways where we can find this out, but knowing your own narrative and how your past has formed who you are. And it's not to throw it away. That is a valuable thing, even if it's been full of really difficult times or difficult moments, or even things that might have been that are considered traumatic events. That still makes up who you are today, and it is your story. But you need to look at that story and acknowledge that story so you can kind of set it to the side and keep yourself clear and keep your mind clear so you can move into perception taking in a dialogue. And that's what it really means to be in a place of being open and listening. So often, and this is why it's really important to know your listening skills and to practice listening. You should not actually just hearing me blab on here, blah, 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 is another opportunity to be a listener and to sort through all the blah blahs to get to the nuts and bolts that you need. And then you'll produce deliverables for the class and enter into that dialogue. Okay, so I'm going to give an example as well. Just to better understand John Rawls, because I think it's really important. So I'm probably saying his name wrong. Sorry about that, Mr. Rawls. Rawls. My mouth does struggle with the Rawls, but hopefully I'm doing some justice to it. So there's a movie from Pixar, Disney called Up. Maybe you've seen this movie Up, and it's about an older gentleman who is enveloped in grief that has become harmful to himself, this grief. And it's full of regrets, and it's full of loss and sadness. And if we use John Rawls' theory, we can look at Carl, our old man, and the young boy, Russell. Is it Russell? Yes, Russell, who shows up uh, as a Boy Scout wanting to help Carl out so he can earn his last merit badge. And this is a great opportunity to kind of understand what is happening with these symbolic interaction, social responsibility, and our justice as fairness and our veil of ignorance, and all of these terms I just talked about. So if I were to apply this idea, the first important thing is to understand the power of grief, and how grief is a set of all a set of neurochemicals and hormones and things that are happening because of a loss, right? That we have some type of loss, whether in whatever form that comes at us. For Carl, we get this interesting opening to this movie that is completely nonverbal, where we see Carl as a little boy, he meets a girl, they share a friendship and a promise to be adventurers when they grow up. And they end up falling in love, they get married, they aren't able to have kids, but they grow old together, and she passes away before him. This is the very opening of the movie Up. And this montage, if we were to take symbolic interaction, is full of music, and the animation is telling you this rich story without any words at all, no language. It is all through the emotion. The emotions are conveyed through the music and the nonverbals of the characters and the timeline of events that we know the story. Isn't that amazing that this whole little story can be told without any verbiage at all? And I want you to think about some of your favorite things that you have interacted with that had no language, but you got the story. That's symbolic interaction. You had an interaction with something and you were able to attach meaning to the messages. So that being said, uh, after we get this montage, we find Carl in a little house, and the city is building up behind around his house. And this becomes another symbol of the veil of ignorance, that his grief has boxed him in, and he has become less and less interacting with the world. And whenever he does interact with the world, we have this begudgeoned, grumpy old man kind of stereotype, and aggressive and angry. And his interactions with the other characters until Russell shows up, which is not different with Russell, but Russell is a significant difference and change. That he is not, he has, that's how we know he has the veil of ignorance and a fixed mindset, because he has bricked himself in to his grief, and he is in a dark, deep place, have cut himself off from others. So that means that uh, when Russell shows up and wants to get his merit badge for his last Boy Scout badge, we see that Russell represents social responsibility. He is representing this idea of service. And Carl, the old man, has lost his ability to understand that his role in society and his purpose, and he has cut. And we do that to elderly as well in general in our society, that we somehow, oh, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to, but everyone needs service. That is an essential component of being human, is how we give to others. So Russell, though, we find out, is actually trying to get this merit badge not for the right reason. I mean, it is for a good reason, but it's not for the reason of social that he wants to help the elderly. He has a neglectful father, and he thinks if he gets the last badge, there's a ceremony at the Boy Scouts, have a ceremony, and his father will come to the ceremony and put the badge on him, and he will get to be seen. And he's looking for this external validation of being seen through the merit of accomplishing and getting the final badge that he needs. So, as Russell and Carl's friendship and relationship develops through the movie, we see this expansion that they both need to actually come to a place and of understanding their social contracts with each other, uh, have to move beyond just checking the box that I did it. Um, we need heart. We need that heart in it. And so that means that when Russell gets a deeper sense of belonging, because he's been too much also in autonomy. He's just like Carl that way, even though he's young, he's been pushed out and isolated, and he doesn't feel seen. That through his relationship with Carl and their adventuring, they start to develop a deeper bond of connection and friendship. And that means that when they engage in the social responsibility of helping each other achieve the goal they need to achieve, they um, they transcend the external motivation. I mean, he still will get that merit badge because he will assist an elder who needs help, but it is not to get the marriage badge. There's a difference in what Russell experienced when he gets transformed into a place of empathy and wanting to be inclusive and fair and a friendship and coming at it with heart. And of course, Carl realizes the importance of caring for someone. And the house that he has, the house is his veil of ignorance that he has encased himself in the movie. When he starts tearing up the house and throwing things out, he is actually taking out the bricks of his veil of ignorance so that he can move towards uh, also um, he can move past his kind of how do I want to say this? He is moving towards understanding that he has a purpose beyond himself. And his purpose is to fill his social contract. And through the friendship with Russell and the other little characters that show up, he begins to build well being and true happiness. And now we're getting to the point I want to get to, this idea of happiness as the path to the pursuit of happiness is the pursuit of gratitude. It is the pursuit of well-being for self and others. Uh, if you just choose one group and we will sacrifice this group for the well-being of this group, that's a utilitarian ethic. You're like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you are going to suffer because of this new law or this new policy. But look at this other group and we want the greater good. This is what we need. When you hear that type of language, that's utilitarian. That's a utilitarian ethic. And it's really built on the consequential piece of it. However, when we talked about John Rawls, and we're building into this idea of John Locke's natural rights, we get a more contemporary idea about responsibility to others and what does a world of justice look like. And it's a world of fairness, or being of understanding that some groups of people some groups of people or the environment or you has taken an um unproportioned burden of the sacrifice to the group. And there should be more attempt to create balance. Now, we are talking about idyllic kind of ideas. That's what philosophy is. But I wonder how we can get boots on the ground. Each of you are reading a different book. How does this translate to what you're talking about in the books you're reading, and this idea of creating the idea of self, and there's do you how are we moving from a narrow sense of self, of me, myself, and I, and expanding it and expanding your sense of self to include others. And when you move towards purpose and gratitude and you can give to others, let's see if there's a better way I can say this. You activate that oxytocin every time you create purpose. And this can be as simple as, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to change anything you're doing, but you should change in your mind the way you think about your actions to be in an act of service. And we notice that when you sit in calm places and understand that you belong to the group, you can stay calm and focused and build into a place of agency through that idea of fulfillment. Okay. Let me just check. I feel like we got through it all. This is a tough week because I think these are really complicated ideas. That's why I have a few extra videos up this week to get other voices in, that to think about what is the connection to happiness and gratitude. And I also have these songs that I put on the overview page every week. And if you look at the songs and the lyrics or the visuals, I choose them to try and, I feel like they echo and amplify ideas of that week, but they could fit for most of the weeks, or if not all the weeks. And so in your next team meeting, I'm asking you to choose one of these songs I've posted on the Canvas page and explain how it connects to one of the philosophical or ethical theories or communication theories we've talked about. Uh, and that, even though I've posted it for 1 week, if you think it fits better in another week, let's go. I want to hear that. I can't wait. It'll be a very exciting team meeting coming up. Also, this week that I'm talking about now, week 6, there's one video I don't think does this. No, they all are doing this. They are all, nope, you're right. I'm right. There is one that does not do this. But it's still a band. But the other ones are all either duets, or they are coming together as different musicians to pull together and sing a song together. And I think that is real essence of dialogue. And it's why you see a lot of my songs coming up that have this kind of duet quality to it. Even when they're in the same song, I think it amplifies our idea of dialogue, which we are talking about this term. Yay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all your work. This is not an easy topic, and I really appreciate the way you are trudging through it. I know sometimes it it can feel muddy out there, but don't worry, you're getting it. When I listen to your team meetings, when I'm listening to your book reports, I am getting very excited. So stay on track. We are on our way here in the second half of the term. Bye-bye.